guys, welcome to the Authentic Kitchen Cooking Tips. We are not going to be cooking today, but we are going to be talking about the super cool topic of knife sharpening. If you already know how to sharpen knives and have got all the gadgets and the know-how, feel free to skip this video, but if you don't or would like to learn how, this is for you. You all received a kit of knives at the beginning of this program, and maybe a few of them are getting dull. Dull knives are pretty common, but they don't have to be, and they shouldn't be, because they're not only harder to use and clumsy and annoying, but they're also kind of dangerous. So, if you have a knife that's starting to feel a little dull, there are 3 steps to the sharpening process: honing, sharpening, and storing. So, if you have your knife that you want to sharpen, the first step is actually to hone it, which is not sharpening, it's something different. So I have this helpful diagram here. So when your knife is new or very sharp, it has a perfect triangular sharp edge to it. But it's really thin at the bottom, so over time as you use it, that tip is actually going to bend and warp a little bit. So it might feel dull, but the knife is actually not dull. It's still sharp, it's just a little bent. So honing brings that tip back into alignment so you can keep cooking with it without having to sharpen it. So that is done with a honing steel, which is usually just a long steel rod with a handle. And if you don't have one of those, I would highly recommend getting one. I have a little mini one, but even something this small works just fine. So the principle of honing is to take the knife and slide it across the blade, or slide it across the steel rod to bring that edge back. So you can hold it horizontally, but I'd really recommend, especially if you have a longer one, to hold it vertically and hone down. But I'm going to hold it horizontally. So something to note is the angle that your knife is going to be honed at, so that you want a 20 to 30 degree angle. So if you put your knife at 90 degrees, cut it in half to 45, and then cut that in half again, that's about the angle that you want to have. And you're going to start with the knife base against the steel at that angle, and you're going to draw it down to the tip. And you want to make sure it maintains constant contact with the honing steel the entire time. So another thing to remember is alternating. When you hone on one side, you want to switch immediately and hone the other side. And keep going back and forth in this motion. You don't want to hone one side a few times and then the other side, because you're just going to warp your blade one way or another. And you don't need a whole lot of pressure. You just want to slide it and then hone the other side. And you don't need to do this too many times, although it depends on how often you hone your knife. A knife should be honed at least once a week, but best practice is to hone it almost every time you cut something. A lot of professional chefs will do this. They'll hone their knife and then cut, because the blade edge on the tip is so thin, it can warp really easily. So even if you're cutting something tough too, like meat, feel free to hone even in the middle of the cut. It doesn't take any metal off the blades, it doesn't contribute to wear and tear on the blades, so don't be afraid to hone your knife. Now, usually that's good enough to get you to where you're cutting evenly again and the knife works really well, and that can last you a long time. But sometimes your knife is actually dull, where it doesn't have that tip anymore, and you actually need to take some of that metal off of the knife to get your tip back. And that is done with in a few ways, most commonly with a whetstone or a sharpening tool. A whetstone is a rectangular block of very finely textured stone that the blade is rubbed against, and that will take the metal off to get the edge. That is definitely the best way to sharpen your knife, and it's easiest on your knife, but it's also a lot trickier. Can be more expensive, so unless you have very high-end knives, a handheld sharpening tool or even like a tabletop tool will do nicely. So you have in your kit a sharpener that looks like this. I have mine, which is a little bit different, but all handheld sharpening tools have pretty much the same system, and that's going to have 2 slots that have a material shaped in a V like this that you're gonna put the knife blade into and draw it through. And that V is gonna take metal off the blade to get that sharp edge back. There are two ends on your sharpener. There's a carbide steel end and there's a ceramic end. And you wanna use them sequentially. So you're gonna run your knife through the carbide first, which is a very tough, brittle material, much tougher than your knife blade. That's gonna strip some of the metal off to get the edge. And then the ceramic is gonna give it a really razor sharp finish. Step 1 to using your sharpener is to hone, just in case there is a little bit of a warp. If you don't have a honing tool, you should definitely try to have one. You don't want to sharpen your knife just on any old metal, but some handheld sharpeners like this one actually have really small honing steels, which this looks small, but you can still hone a blade on it. So if you have a little sharpener, just look for a surface like that. And then you're gonna use first the carbide. So you can see usually it's labeled carbide and ceramic. And on this one, that's the same thing. So we'll go ahead and use your sharpener. So you want to place the knife into it and you wanna make sure it's as straight as you can get it inside that V, but that V is gonna guide your knife blade down. And you're just gonna draw it through. You don't need to apply a lot of pressure. Just let the weight of the knife do that. If you press too hard, you're gonna take too much metal off of the blade and wear it down. But draw it through until it runs through very smoothly. There's no catches. It doesn't catch or hiccup anywhere. And when you feel like you've done enough, you can flip it to the fine side and run it through a few times. Again, you just want it to be really smooth. At that point, you can test your blade to see how sharp it is. A great way to do that is to try and cut a tomato because the skin is really tough for knives. That's a great litmus test. Some knives will take longer to sharpen than others depending on how dull the blade was. So a lot of these things, the warping on a blade or the dullness of a knife edge is actually on a microscopic level. So if you can literally see the dullness of your knife, you might want to take it to a professional or it's just going to take a really long time. Sharpening should not be done more than maybe once or twice a year because it does take metal off of your blade and contributes to wear and tear. So you want to be gentle when you're sharpening, and again, always hone first because that's usually the only thing that you need. So the final step of sharpening is storing. Storing is arguably the most important step in this. You want to reduce any extra wear and tear on the blade outside of cooking, so that can be as simple as using a knife block to store your knife, using a magnetic strip on the wall, or your knives have really nice plastic sheaths, so you can put it in a drawer. If you have other knives that don't have sheaths, you can make one out of cardboard and duct tape. They don't have to be fancy. You do not want to put your knives in the dishwasher. All that clanking around with silverware and the metal racks is not great for your knife. And you really, really, really want to avoid just putting knife blades into a drawer. That's not great for the blade. That's a lot of hard objects that are coming up against it. And it's not really great for you to be reaching into a drawer of a bunch of knives. So that is what we have for you today. This is by no means an exhaustive video on knife sharpening. If you want to get more information or a little confused on techniques, there's a lot of great videos out there, and there's a really big nerdy world of knife sharpening on the internet to check out as well. But stay safe, keep your knives sharp, and we'll see you next time.